So I would like to call the January 12th meeting of the Larkspur Planning Commission to order. Could we start with the roll call, please?
Okay, thank you, Chair Tauber and members of the commission. From my top to bottom, starting with Chair Tauber,
Here.
Commissioner Wagstaff, Vice Chair.
Here.
Commissioner Kunstler.
Here.
Commissioner Swisher.
Here.
And Commissioner Chalmers.
Yeah. Excuse me.
So all are present.
Very good. I see there's 11 now attendees. Is there anyone who would like to have to talk about anything that is not currently on the agenda? And that's really open to the members of the public who would like to speak on anything. If you would like to, if you could raise your virtual hand. Hopefully you all know how to do that. Oops. Eric, you changed your mind? Okay. All right, seeing none, I will move on to the planning director's report.
Okay, thank you, commissioners and Chair Tauber and members of the commission. Happy New Year. We've had quite a break. There were no meetings of the commission in December. Nonetheless, we continue to be busy here at City Hall. We're continuing to stagger our work schedules to provide as much remote work as possible, and other things that are going on. And we'll talk about this a little later in the evening. I do have a business item on. We're going to go through some of the work program projects that will be coming up this year, and some of the participation requirements and issues that will be facing the Planning Commission. But one item that's most current is we've now put the draft general plan in late December. We got it up on the website in a fully complete draft. It is accessible. We've done all the formatting, and we have the graphics are provided in a fairly large format as well, so it's easy to drill down to individual properties. And we have begun the environmental review process. That's a process that runs parallel to the general plan update. So I think for the benefit of the public who might be watching now, we have released the notice of preparation and have begun the timeline for environmental review, and we'll begin preparing a draft EIR for the general plan update. With that, we are just now preparing for the new year, wrapping up last year's business. And do I have any questions from the Planning Commission?
None here.
No.
Okay.
That's it, Neil?
That's it.
Okay, just want to make sure. So we do have one item on the public hearing calendar. That is design review fence height exception 20-24 for 80 Corte del Valle in Larkspur.
Hi, and I live in the vicinity of the property, so I'm going to recuse myself from any discussion on this property. So I'm going to drop off.
And you will become an attendee. Could we have the staff report?
Thank you.
The applicant's requesting design review approval and a fence height exception to demolish an existing two-story single-family home and construct a new two-story single-family home that totals about 3,637 square feet. The subject site's in the Greenbrae Marina neighborhood. It's a pie-shaped parcel where the narrower frontage is on Corte del Bio, and the wider portion of the lot fans out into the lagoon behind the property or the house. The proposed home would be centrally located on the lot, occupying a similar building footprint to the existing home, but expanding to the south rear and west side of the property. The existing design currently complies with all the zoning regulations, including height limits, setbacks, lot coverage. The property is being required to raise the finished floor of the home up some to meet the minimum FEMA required flood elevation levels. So that added approximately a foot or so to the height of the proposed building, which is at about 27 plus feet. The new design as proposed would be a very sort of modular, clean, blocky, modern design with a flat roof. The exterior finishes would be a charred vertical exterior wood siding combined with some dark gray tiling. They have dark anodized windows, a metal garage door, and metal trim finishes. The homes in this neighborhood are generally lined up in a side-by-side configuration along the streets. Most of the viewing windows from these homes are looking out to the front yards and into the rear yards, either at the creek or the lagoons, for the most part. The homes themselves are traditionally kind of a blocky design in this neighborhood, a little bit more vertical than in some other neighborhoods. Based on the way that this home is placed on the lot and in generally the same footprint and the staggered design of its components, where it's a kind of stepping back, it looks like the home itself will not unduly impose itself on the sides of the homes on either side of it. And when viewed from the street with the garage stepping forward and the body of the massing stepping back, it looks to be somewhat compatible with the neighborhood, albeit larger and a bit more blocky in design than the typical home you see around in the streetscape. Staff did raise two design concerns with regard to this property, in large part due to its sort of larger massing. First, because it's stepping back to the south, the neighbor at 90 Corte del Bio has written a letter and provided photographs, and staff has visited the site trying to determine the impacts. But her concerns are largely that her view of what she characterizes as Mount Tam is being imposed upon by the new massing of the home stepping back, and that she's losing sunlight into her westerly facing window. It turns out, just unusually for this neighborhood, this home has a portion of the home that turns sideways and looks west and has a living room window that is facing toward this property. And as it steps back, she will definitely, from my looking at the story pole standing beneath the window, she's definitely it's gonna change the view, and there's gonna be a two-story massing in front of this window now. At the time I was there, I couldn't determine if there was any significant impact on a view of Mount Tam, but it's clear she's got some view of the surrounding hillsides that run off to the south of Mount Tam. And there will be some impact on that. She also has windows that allow her in a backyard that allows her a view of the lagoon in a broad base in all the homes of the surrounding neighborhood out there around the lagoon. The other concern was that the massing will impact her just in terms of being a visual imposition. So it was those were the primary concerns. Other than that, staff had indicated in the report that although the home is larger than many others and a bit more blocky in design, this seems to be the direction this neighborhood has been going in recent years. And there are past approvals with other types of modern designs that have little articulation and relief. So we did not find that this was necessarily out of character with the neighborhood in general. And when viewed from the street, it doesn't appear that it will be overly imposing because it steps back to the center of the lot. But due to the concerns that we raised for 90 Via Labrisa and the possible imposition on her and her light and view, we did indicate that the commission should consider those concerns and determine if they were significant and unreasonable, which is the wording out of our findings. If the impact is determined to be significant or an unreasonable impact, then the commission should consider if there are amendments that could be done to this design that would relieve or reduce that impact. So at this point, staff has recommended you determine if you can approve this project or if there are impacts that could be mitigated. And if so, and they're not too significant, we recommend you continue the application to a date uncertain and allow the applicant to consider modification that would meet your comments. If you determine that there are no more minor modifications that can be accomplished that would mitigate the impacts, then the application should be denied and the applicant without prejudice, and the applicant can reconsider the design in a more leisurely fashion. If the commission determines that ultimately the impacts are not significant on the neighbor and the project can be approved, we have provided you with draft conditions of approval for your consideration. In that case, this application should be continued to the next meeting in January, and that would allow staff to prepare the findings for approval. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Kristen?
Yeah, I've got a question, Laura, with regard to the fence, Kristen. What would be a permissible height under the code, assuming, of course, that the fence didn't encroach on the right of way, on the easement?
Well, the fence doesn't actually encroach in the right of way. It's 2 feet back from the property line. Right. It's just within the 10-foot setback, and the maximum height within the setback is 42 inches.
It is 42 inches. Yeah, that's
right.
Okay.
So, I didn't even touch on that, forgive me. I recommended that the fence be stepped back behind the front yard accent trees to give it a little buffer from the roadway and be more compatible with the remaining front yards, which are largely open.
Right, that was very clear in the report. Thanks.
Mhm.
And the side yard's okay?
Well, within the front yard 10-foot setback, the side fence is also subject to this fence height exception, but once it steps back into the yard, it's currently around 6 feet.
Kristen, I noticed in one spot where it looks like the house gets into the 15-foot buffer from the bulkhead. Is that actually allowed within the HOA, or?
I read that to be the eave overhang, that dark line that where you see it. Sort of.
I don't think so.
If that's not the, I guess there really isn't much of an eave overhang.
There is no eave.
Mhm. Well, the Marina Association did review this plan and sign the forms. So I haven't received any objection with regard to the corner being slightly in that setback. That is a specific requirement of the homeowners association itself. It has nothing to do with staff's zoning application.
I thought so. I just wasn't sure because you had mentioned it in your report.
Any other questions for Kristen?
Also, there are a few things that don't quite jibe. The site plan that shows for, and I think that's just the site plan that shows for construction equipment is not exactly, the footprint of the house isn't the same as the footprint in this site plan. There's the first one you see has a notch on the neighbor's side that that looks like it's set back, but I assume that's not correct. Since
Which-
nothing else
You have to
jives with
give me
that.
the page numbers. I'm not sure what you're,
It's sheet GO.02. .02.
and that conflicts with, oh, yeah. And that conflicts with, well, that's the same site plan as what we're looking at here.
Right, but if you look at the site plan that's in way back, it doesn't jibe with what the plan shows, or the site plan for,
Are you looking at the landscape plan or the engineering?
no, I'm
plan?
looking at A 2.00, which is site plan.
Okay,
So that the notch doesn't appear in that one. I just assumed it was something that got past them, but given the neighbors' concerns and the articulation along that side,
Yeah, you're correct. There's a small notch in the G002 and it's not present in 8200.
yeah, it's not, I didn't notice that.
Do you think, Brock, that is gonna, I mean, it looks like if you draw a line from the neighbor's house to there, that doesn't really affect the line of sight issue.
no, we can get into that a little later after
Yeah.
public hearing.
Kristen,
Mhm.
I got one question. It relates to the letter that the neighbor at 90, in number 90, wrote regarding her concerns about ingress and egress during construction.
Mhm.
And point 35 in the conditions of approval does show the construction management plan is required, and it enumerates a certain number of specific items that have to be included in the plan. But there's no mention there in this, well, this might just be a summary of the ingress and egress management. Is that something that you can add as a condition, or should add as a condition of approval, that the plan should include clearances for emergency vehicles or something of that sort, given that this is on a cul-de-sac?
We don't normally include that level of detail in this condition, but maybe Neil should weigh in and let us know if he thinks that that's an appropriate thing to add. I'm pretty sure that Public Works will not allow them to block the roadway without prior notice, and it all has to be set up to ensure public safety as a whole.
Yeah, that's probably sufficient, but
And I'm sorry, I'm kind of half paying attention, but what was the question exactly?
The question was that the neighbor at number 90 was concerned about ingress and egress, particularly ingress and egress for emergency vehicles during construction. And that's not specifically enumerated in the conditions of approval under point 35, which is the construction management plan requirements. And I was just wondering if in this particular situation, given that it is on a cul-de-sac, that there be a condition of approval under that rubric that specifically addresses ingress and egress during construction.
Well, it's not a project that typically requires a construction management plan. Is it, Kristen? Because it's not significant grading. So
No,
you
there's no significant grading, but Public Works did require, just as a standard practice, they included that condition.
Okay, so the Public Works has included a requirement for construction management plan. That plan, they would assure that there's a continued emergency ingress and egress as part of that design.
All right, thanks.
Any other questions for staff? If If not, we can open it up to the applicant and see if they would like to present.
Okay, I'm going to let Bryn Garrett speak.
Hello, this is Bryn. Is it possible to also unmute the owner of the property, Pascal Zuta?
Sure.
He's going to just speak briefly. And then...
Okay, Pascal, you should be able to. Oh, yeah.
Yes, I'm here. So great. So thank you very much for hearing us today. We're very excited about the plans that we have submitted. And so we are a family of 5 plus a dog. And in Germany, where we grew up, you build one house in your life. So we've been taking this very seriously. And we have 2 daughters, 4 and 9 years, and a 12-year-old son at Neil Cummins and Hall Middle School. So just around the corner, and kids can walk to school, ride their bikes, and they'll be able to continue to do that from Corte del Valle. That's important for us, part of the lifestyle we're looking to keep and to have. We've always been traveling a lot all around the world, and we've been always looking for the perfect place to live as a family for a long, long time, all around the world. So our move from Berlin, Germany to Larkspur in 2015 was very intentional, because we fell in love with the sun. We love to hike and mountain bike in the forests as we used to enjoy back in Germany in the Alps. And we love to be close to the sea. So we spent the last few years actually in Costa Madera, specifically waiting for the right lot to come up at the lagoon. And so we're super excited about making this our home. It's absolutely perfect for us. Lots of sun and right between the water and the wonderful redwood tree. So very excited about this. And thank you very much for taking time today for us.
Great, thanks. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So my name is Bryn Garrett. I'm an associate principal at URC Architects. We are a firm located in San Francisco. So if you could please progress to the 3rd slide. So I just want to speak a little bit about the major project goals. And I'm sorry, we're going to have a number of slides here. I'm going to move through them as quickly as I can. And then there's some at the end that are just an appendix that can come up if the discussion leads us there. But I want to start with project goals. As Pascal explained, we're looking to expand the existing home. At first we looked to remodel the existing house, and we realized that the foundations and the sinking home wouldn't allow for that. So we needed to grow it to accommodate his family of 5. But we did like a lot about the existing house, and mainly the general layout of the house on the site, and preserving the very large heritage redwood tree in the front yard. That's not only an asset for Pascal and his family, but for that whole cul-de-sac. It's one of the largest trees that's still there. And then a big design ethos for us is the seamless indoor-outdoor transition living. And that's why we tried to preserve a lot of the design principles that are evident in the existing home, including the rear deck and that kind of glazing that lets you see from the redwood through to the backyard. And then one big point I wanted to point out is that this house is going to be prefabricated in a factory. It's custom, it's completely custom, but it's going to be prefabricated. And this is because the family really wanted to use the newest technology in terms of construction, and it's going to really minimize the construction time. So they're going to be able to install these modules in a matter of weeks instead of months. And of course, the impact to neighbors, the noise, the construction waste will all be minimized. And then lastly, integrating all of these very sustainable systems that hopefully make the home kind of as far off the grid as we can, with PV array, sustainable mechanical systems, and again, using the prefabricated technology. Let's go to the next slide, please. So just orienting everyone, north is up on this sheet. You can see it's a pie-shaped lot. It's at a very significant, very prominent location. The family's not moving here necessarily for privacy, and they're aware that their backyard is going to be very visible from other homes on the lagoon. I did want to point out, go to the next slide. Back one, thank you. Did want to point out that as you can see here, we've shown the footprints of the other homes on the cul-de-sac. And this stands out as one of the more underdeveloped houses based on the size of the lot, which is one of the larger lots. You can also see how a lot of the other homes build quite close to the their side yard setbacks, whereas this home still has quite a bit of space to give in those side yards. You can see how we're really constrained on the front and the rear of the home. And so our option really was to only go out to the sides. You can go to the next slide. So as we zoom in here, you can see, I'd like to note the separation that this house has from the other homes currently. This is the existing footprint. You can see how we're respecting the front yard, side yard, and rear setbacks. And we tried to maintain that in the proposed design. So not hugging those setbacks, but still providing adequate space separation for light and air to reach the neighbors. Next slide, please. So this is the proposed ground floor expansion. You can see the red dotted line is the existing footprint. And so with that heritage redwood tree, we had it analyzed. It's still a very healthy tree. And so we're not going to get any closer to that tree than the existing house. And that was important not to impact the roots. And so you can see the blue shaded areas are where we are expanding out on the ground floor. I do want to point out that, the general arrangement of rooms, the living areas and the bedrooms are in the same general locations of the existing home, so that not much is changing there. The rooms themselves are very modest in size. We're not adding extravagant rooms or additional rooms more than what's necessary to just accommodate the family. You can also see there's a lot more ins and outs in the floor plan. The existing home is just a straight extrusion for both floors. So it's two kind of sheer two-story walls all the way around, where we're trying to provide a little bit more visual interest with this proposed design. You can go to the next slide, please. And so you can see here the expansion on the second floor, again, mostly towards the west and to the east. And note how the separation between our proposed design and the neighbors increases as the site expands in this pie shape towards the water. I'd like to note here that the one point that was brought up in the staff report about the height of the home. We're one of the first that have to comply with the FEMA floodplain requirements that raises the home by a foot. Not only that, the foundations of the home had been sinking for many years, and so it was actually below what it should have been. So bringing it up just to meet FEMA almost got us to 2 feet in additional height. Add to that, the ceiling heights in the existing home are 8 foot on both the first and the second floor. And we felt like we needed to provide something that was a little bit more modern and generous based on how homes are designed today. So that added a little bit more height. So really just looking at those constraints of the redwood tree, we were trying to be as careful as we could in our expansion onto the back and to the sides. I did want to also note that the garage is existing, and that was so that we could minimize the bulk and impact to the street presence, and in similar fashion to other properties that have been developed over the years on this street in particular. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Here's some photographs just so you can see clearly the prominence of this redwood tree in the front yard. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So I wanted to speak a little bit about the method of construction. You can see this is our module layout. We put a lot of thought into how we can make this home not look like a prefab home. You know, I know when a lot of people hear prefab, they think it's going to look like those trailer offices that are kind of shipped and dropped on site. We're working with a very good company called Plant Prefab out of Southern California that's built a number of homes in Northern California. They build these in a factory 5 months and deliver it to site, and they're installed within a matter of 3 to 4 weeks. And we put a lot of thought into how to arrange these modules in a way that made it a little bit more visually interesting than your standard prefab home. So there's nothing on the exterior that should give this away as a prefab home. It should look like a custom home, and that's what we were after. The floor plan reflects generally the same layout as the existing, and that's again screened by the redwood tree. So from the street, our hope is that you're not going to see much of the expansion at all. Let's go to the next slide, please. So, before I forget, I did want to touch on 2 points that were brought up by commissioners about the drawings. You mentioned the notch on the southeast corner that seemed to be apparent in the construction management plan, but not in the site plan. That's simply because the site plan was showing the ground floor footprint, whereas the construction management plan shows the roof overhang. So that notch is just a result of the roof overhang, the roof plan on the construction management drawing. The other comment about the 15-foot setback from the bulkhead, that's because the second floor cantilevers a little bit at that corner, and so it does go over the setback, but that does not continue down to the ground where it would be within the setback. We worked extensively with Craig Herzog, who is very familiar with this area. He's a geotechnical engineer, and he has a reputation to be quite conservative. And he really worked with us to make sure that no structure is in that 15-foot setback. The rear deck actually cantilevers out over the ground in that area. It does not have foundations in that area. So that is why the HOA deemed that acceptable and approved the design. We did want to touch on the neighborhood outreach. We have 2 direct neighbors. First, I'll talk about 70 Corte del Valle. If we could go to the next slide, please. So very early on in the process, we approached this neighbor with the design. This was in April, May of last year. And we shared our plans for expanding out towards the west that were going to impact this neighbor the most. At that time, they objected because of the views out of this converted loft window you see here that's in the side yard. They currently have sweeping views of the lagoon that are a result of our underdeveloped parcel. We just wanted to point out, though, that this view is a kind of a tertiary view out of the side yard. It's not out of a bedroom, and it's not out of a living area. So we heard their concern. If you could please go to the next slide. So you can see here, this is the southwest corner of our proposed design. On the left-hand side was the original design. We were trying to take advantage of the added area, go up to the setback here, and provide enough room for a nice corner window to look at Mount Tam. We heard their concern. We brought it back in and reduced the building footprint on 88 square feet on both levels. So for a total of 153 square feet. And we also frosted the lower half of that bathroom window just for privacy concerns. Our client also offered to pay for the installation of a new window in their house that was going to be double the size of the current window. And that was going to be at a cost of $8,000, but he was happy to do that to try and recapture some of those views that were lost from our home. So at that time, the neighbors seemed to agree to those changes and be on board with the project. And then unfortunately, they changed their minds after the story poles were erected and voiced some concern. I believe they had a call into the city about that. Let's go to the next slide, please. So in summary, we scaled back that corner, reduced the footprint by 153 or 88 square feet on each level, 153 square feet total. We offered to pay for a new window at a cost of $8,000, and we frosted the window for privacy concerns. Next slide, please. 90 Corte del Bayo, this is the neighbor that filed a formal objection that's in the staff report. You can see here, you can see the tree that's mentioned in the staff report there is kind of in front of her window from her living room that's facing west. Let's go to the next slide, please. So likewise, we approached this neighbor very early on in the process, and she also immediately spoke of her concern of blocked views of the foothills. And we did want to clarify that she does not actually have a direct view of Mount Tam from this window. It's actually of Christmas Tree Hill. And we know that's very important to people in this neighborhood, and we don't want to diminish that. But we don't want our project to be characterized as losing a view that she once had of Mount Tam. We also noticed that the view is significantly obscured by this tree that's in her property. So it wasn't considered, the major concern was preserving that view if it was already significantly obscured. Next. So we heard those concerns, and we did have a shade trellis structure in the backyard to shade the deck. It is south facing with a lot of direct sun. We decided to go ahead and remove that, and if we need shade, we can just put up temporary small umbrellas or what have you. So we went ahead and removed that in the new proposed design. We also, she mentioned that she was concerned about some palm trees you can see in the rendering on the left there. The family were, as part of moving to this California lifestyle, they were really excited to have some palm trees, and we took those out to not obscure her view. Let's go to the next slide, please. In addition to that, we used to have a pop out of 22 square feet. You can see that on the left two plans. That's showing on the top left corner, that's the second floor, and on the bottom left, is the kitchen on the bottom floor. And on the right two plans, we've removed that pop out entirely. The kitchen was already pretty small, and the bedroom upstairs was already really small. And so it was hard for us to lose that space, but we felt like it was the right thing to do. So we also relocated a window that used to be east facing and moved it to a north facing elevation. Let's go to the next slide, please. So that's just showing here how that pop out has been pushed back in and adjusted at that corner. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so I think as Kristen mentioned in the staff report, we just wanted to showcase the impact to her view from that west-facing window. We understand that it's, that corner of our lot's been kind of underdeveloped, and she's, benefited from having that view for a long time. But overall, it's still a view that's kind of out of the side of the house, and for it to kind of limit our expansion into that area, it feels like it'd only be it sort of be unfair for us to sacrifice that if it's only impacting a very small percentage of her view. I did want to note that at the moment the house at 90 Corte del Bayo is a very low slung house that is undoubtedly will be developed in the future and probably go to 2 stories. And so our house at the moment, our proposed design, won't feel as big or bulky compared to her house in the future. And with that, can we go to the next slide? So in summary, We tried to make a number of concessions to get her approval and be on board with the project, removing the trellis. We also offered to pay for the installation of a larger window in her house that would give her more views to the south and to the east. We reworked the landscape to get rid of the taller plants. We relocated an east-facing window to give her privacy, and we scaled back the initial design by 22 square feet. Next slide. And then I just wanted to bring up for context, these are 3 projects that were recently approved by design review. And we wanted to point these particular projects out: 97 Corte del Bio, 164 Riviera Circle, and 370 Riviera Circle, for their similarities to our project, not only in FAR, but in the separation between the neighbors' homes. So even though we're expanding to the east and to the west towards the neighbors, we still are maintaining larger than normal setbacks to those homes. And we felt like that was important and the right thing to do. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Do any commissioners have questions for the applicant? Okay, I am not seeing any, so we can have other members of the public speak. And I'm not sure the order that the hands went up, but I see Joan Weeder,
Okay.
Deborah Harnett.
Okay, Joan, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I take an inhaler, so it affects my vocal cords. So if you have trouble hearing me, please ask me to repeat myself. First of all, I don't plan to sell my house or build a second story. So I appreciate the architect planning my demise or the sale of my house to add a second story, but that's not in my near future, thank you. I also would like to point out that I am at the point of a cul-de-sac, and therefore the impact of the proposed building at 80 is different than it would be if it was on a different lot on a straight street. So that, and if you saw the picture that I took, the view out my window where I spend 12 to 14 hours a day, it's my living space, is not greatly obscured by the trees. I can greatly appreciate how Pascal and his family planned and want to enjoy their home. And I look forward to having them as their neighbors. But I also don't want it to be at the expense of the enjoyment of the light and the air at my home. That's something that the city council, by its own rules and regulations, should consider. This proposal for the modular home at 80 does stick out tremendously, as you can see from the pictures that you have an opportunity to look at. Greatly obscure my view at the hills, will greatly cut out the light that I get most of the day, and the air during the summer particularly that I will get from the west, where most of the air comes from during the summer. And these are considerations that the Planning Commission is required to make. Because it's a cul-de-sac And the way that the property sticks out, this will be a great imposition on my property. I understand they want to save the redwood tree, but to save the redwood tree, they're building primarily toward the lagoon. As an aside, the redwood tree roots are really impeding my drainage system because they're coming this side. And so I'm going to have to put in my drain system materials that are going to have to kill the roots. I don't want to do that, but that's something you're going to have to consider. Also, unfortunately, the trees you're referring to as obscuring my view, which they don't, are being attacked by thrip and will have to come down in the near future. So my view is going to be less obscured by that. So I do hope that the Planning Commission, by having less consideration for the redwood tree, would have greater consideration for the value of my home, which is going to be greatly impacted by the current plans. Also, I'd like to remark that for about a year and a half, the building at 97 has greatly impeded the traffic within the cul-de-sac. And I called the police several times because I couldn't get out of my driveway. And I do have medical problems where I will have to possibly require immediate access to either emergency vehicles or driving myself to the hospital. So it is a concern that I have access to emergency help. And I don't know how, with the narrowness of Corte del Bio, bringing modules down, how that's going to be considered by the city. So that is a concern that I wish that the Planning Commission, when they do grant approval, take cognizance of, because if they block the street and the cul-de-sac, how are they going to get people in and out if there is an emergency? Because the police have not been acting with alacrity in the past. And I hope you take that in consideration when modules are being brought in, because I have a feeling that they're going to be a little larger than regular building materials. And thank you so much for hearing my concerns. And I really do hope that Pascal and his family do have the opportunity to build their dream house. But I do hope that it is with consideration for my living comfortably and enjoying my dream house. And thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you. Deborah?
Okay, Deborah, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Deborah Harnett. I live at 50 Corte del Bio, so I'm 2 houses away. And I've been here for 14 years and I absolutely love where I live. And I'm excited that the people that want to come here are excited about our area because it's very special. And there's 2 things that I wanted to talk about. One is the second slide had square footages. It had 3,600 square feet on top of my house, which is only 2,300. And in the house next door to me, which is 60 Corte del Bio, they had 4,000 square feet, and that's only 2,400 square feet. So I'm really not understanding why those numbers are on top of our house. If you're saying that our neighborhood has a lot of other houses with large square footages, there are some new houses, but most of us are in the 23, 24, 25, unless somebody's put a second story on. So that's one thing. But the main reason that I'm on the call is because I'm concerned about the fence. We have rules and standards here that we've all created together to make the properties as wonderful as they are now. And in order to have a 6-foot fence, there's supposed to be a 9-foot or 10-foot setback. And having a setback of 4.5 feet and 6 feet, 6 inches tall, it feels like a prison. Somehow or other, there's one house already on 304 Riviera that everyone's already upset about, and we're all working to get them to change it because it's way over 6'6", and it looks like a prison, and it's not the way our neighborhood is set up. It's set up to be connected and friendly and people being neighborly, and having a giant 6'6" fence in front of your property. I don't know what the purpose is. You can't see over a 6-foot fence, so I don't know why you have to have a 6'6" fence. And I don't understand why they want to have it so close to the property line and not follow the rules that we've set up. If they want to move into our community, I think that's fabulous, but why not follow the rules that we've all worked very hard to create?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else from the public who'd like to speak on this one?
I see
Hey, Eric.
Eric. Okay. Eric, you should be able to. Okay.
My name is Eric Adama, and I live with my wife at 40 Corte del Valle. So we're 3 or 4 doors down the street on the same side of the street, next to Deborah, who just spoke. And we've only been here, I don't know, 4 years or so, but it is a wonderful community, as everyone here knows. And I'm very sympathetic to the concerns that the 2 neighbors raised, particularly those of the lady at 90 Corte del Valle. I thought that was very articulate, though I don't know her personally. I think that she makes very valid points. I think it is presumptive of the architect to presume that, you know, all the houses here will go to second stories. I don't know whether that's the case or not, but you know, I think there's been one on the street that we've seen that has. It just happens to be the other side of the resident at 90 Corte del Valle. I also share the view of Deborah that my primary concern when I saw the notice was on the fence height. Very few of the homes here have fences at all. And, you know, it seems very strange. I'm sure we'll all be delighted to have Pascal and his family as neighbors. But it seems unusual to try and create a security perimeter around that. And that I would just echo that same concern as being real, because that's not the context of the neighborhood, and it's certainly not the ambiance that I think most of us would like to be having going forward. And then I would also just add that, having, you know, walked down the street and see the story poles standing, it does create you know, a clear blockage of the visual perspective out that side. And the houses in that cul-de-sac feel very close together. The mapping that we saw would suggest that there's quite a bit of room, but it certainly doesn't feel that way if you go down there. They feel like they're on top of each other. And when you put the extra height on top, it does sort of cloud, you know, it just feels very enclosed, and there's less light, and it feels overbuilt, is my perspective. But I guess, you know, I'm here just sort of being sympathetic to my neighbors. My primary concern would, first and foremost, would be the fence. And I again would say I don't understand the rationale for having an exception there if you want to integrate with the neighborhood.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to speak on this who has not yet spoken? Sam?
Hi, good afternoon. Can everyone hear me?
Mhm.
Hello?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, just my name is Sam Kim. I'm at 237 Riviera Circle. I just wanted to pitch in and let everyone know that we do and have known the Zudas for several years. We think they're exceptional, and we are tickled to death that they chose to join our neighborhood, and we can't wait for them to actually move in. That being said, with some of the comments on the fences, we don't believe, and I know after very recently having talked to Pascal, I don't think that it's an issue with any desire to erect walls or any physical barricades to preclude a development or a sense of community on their part. My understanding, and you can certainly talk to Pascal later on if necessary, is that the fence really is a relative non-issue, and it's not, I personally don't find it offensive, and to the extent that he can make any modifications and not have it as tall or adjust, if there's any need to adjust the setback, I don't think that that's going to be insurmountable on his part. I do want to just mention that as far as the character or the size or the design of the structure itself, I understand and can appreciate that everyone has their own individual tastes. I myself personally, I love the design. I love the clean lines. I think it brings a great look and upgrade to the community, and which is a current trend among the last few houses that have been built in the past 5 years or so. There have been many that are having more of an urban and conservative feel. And I think also the size, that's all relative. I mean, when people are talking about, for example, 304 Riviera Circle was brought up, they've got a very ugly, blocky 7,000 square foot house. If you want to talk about that particular cul-de-sac, you look at the house just 2 doors down at 97 Corte del Valle. It's 4,100 square feet or so, and it was recently remodeled. Just a few weeks ago, it sold for over $4 million. So if people are worried about property values, the Zuda's design is only going to enhance everyone's property values. There have been a handful of houses now in the past year or so that have sold for over 4 million. That would be unheard of 7 years ago when I moved in. So I am all for the Zuda's designs, and I just wanted to put in my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? So Joan, I see that your hand is up. Was there something additional that you wanted to say?
Joan, you can unmute yourself.
About the fence, I know this is not Pascal's doing, but the city has been noticed that the prior owner of the property has built or planted a virtual vegetation fence on both sides of the property, and had been required to cut at least part of it, but they've been maintaining well in excess of 9, 10, 11 feet of a fence on both sides of the property in violation of city code. While Pascal has owned it, I don't know whether he's aware of these violations, but it does darken the homes on either side. So, it's just something that I want him to be aware of, that I mentioned in my letter to the city council, and something that the commission should be aware of, that it does darken and does distract from the values of our homes, when you give, an inch on, in these variances, because then people get the idea that they don't have to follow the rules. I just wanted to add to my comments that I did give the, in my letter. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I see Bryn.
Hi. So I just wanted to take an opportunity to respond to those comments, if I may. And it's great to see so much feedback. People really do care about this community and the appearances of this home on the cul-de-sac. It seems like a lot of people take issue with the fence, and if we could just for a second go back to our slides and the second page, just so people can get a visual on what the front of the house looks like. The fence that is proposed is actually just a refinishing of the existing fence that was installed by the previous owner. And the reason that we were reusing the fence was to be resourceful, to recycle the fence, not to build a new fence if there's already one there. It was brought to our attention during the submittal process to the planning department that it was not in compliance. And so it seems like that's a big sticking point for a lot of the neighbors. And in speaking with Pascal, we'd be happy to not only lower the height of the fence, but to push it back from the street behind those trees. So that's not an issue at all. We'd be happy to do that. To Joan's comment about the hedges on the side yard fences, again, that's also another issue that Pascal's now aware of, and he's working to come up with a maintenance plan to make sure that those hedges are cut on a regular basis to maintain no more than a 6-foot height. I want to go back just for a second to speak to a couple of Joan's earlier concerns. First of all, the access to her home, which is very important. We, of course, want to work with her on a construction management plan. And that's one of the big benefits we saw with prefab, is that you only have 8 modules that come in here, and then that's it. You don't have big truckloads of material blocking the street. You don't have big trucks blocking her driveway. So that was the real benefit with going the prefab. And of course, we would work out a schedule that those things are delivered in the least obstructive way possible at the times of lowest traffic and disruption. Back to the issue of light and air in her west-facing window. That was one of the reasons that Pascal offered to install and pay for a larger window on that side of her home, was to increase her access to light and air on that side. And so we hope that is something that she will accept as an offer to kind of improve views and light and air to that side of her home. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no other hands up, so I am going to close the public hearing portion on this and bring it back to the commission for comments.
Chair Tauber?
Yes.
Sorry, I need to interrupt for just a sec.
Yes.
I did neglect at the very beginning of the meeting to mention that we had received 3 late mail items. We need to make sure that's in the record, so I'm letting the public know, because some of these individuals may be listening. One was from 73 Via La Brisa, another from 71 Corte del Valle, and I believe a third was on Riviera Circle. I can't think of the street address at the moment, but it was from a Mr. Sam Kim.
Thank you. Okay, commissioner comments, and I'm going to go down the order in my screen. So Commissioner Wagstaff.
I was honestly hoping you would pick somebody else first. So this is a difficult one for me. I like modern design. I basically like the house. And I don't know whether anybody else visited with the next door neighbor at 90 or not, but I did. And sat in her chair and looked out at the story poles, and it does. I think she spends a lot of time there. It does affect her view, and I think if you look at the elevation on 3.01, which is that east elevation, that's a pretty big dark wall that she's going to be looking at. So one part of me wants this house to go forward. The other part feels that there must be a way to mitigate that in some sort of fashion that would help the neighbor out. And then the other thing is I walk the neighborhood partly to give my knee some exercise, and it's going to be one of the biggest, squarest houses anywhere in Riviera Circle area. And that doesn't mean I wouldn't support it as a modern house that's different. I'm just, it's going to be 6 to 7 feet taller than the existing house that's there, partly because they have a 9'6" ceiling in the lower floor and a 9-foot ceiling in the upper floor, and 2 feet between floors, which is unusual. And I guess if I understand it, it's probably the modular system where you're stacking a floor on a ceiling. But and then there's a parapet. So this house is going to be a statement house, and I think everybody needs to think about that. But I personally would like to see if there isn't a way to mitigate the view loss and the light loss as the sun goes down to the neighbor at 90. So that's my thoughts for now.
Thank you. Commissioner Huntsler.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to Commissioner Wagstaff for having visited the home at 90. I was a little loath to ring people's doorbells because of the pandemic situation. So I just observed the story poles from the outside. I'm going to pretty much echo what Commissioner Wagstaff said. I understand the program that the applicant is trying to implement, and there are some good things about it. Yes, it is a modern home. I actually think that the rear of the home, which faces the lagoon for a modern home, is actually rather attractive. I don't mind the design. I think it complies with the aesthetic guidelines that are given by the city code. I appreciate the prefab methodology, because it is environmentally sound to do that. I appreciate that that it would appear that the home will be solar powered as well. That was not brought up. So those are the good things. On the other side of the ledger, though, there is some boxiness to the structure. I think, like Commissioner Wagstaff, I could probably get over that. This is the program, and there's some attractive elements to it that do offset some of the boxiness. With regards to the footprint, I mean, we're sort of this somewhat exceptional situation, for Larkspur, where we've got 40% of the lot which is actually underwater. So what happens is you get with a large structure like this, you do get somewhat of a cessation of the lot being overbuilt, even though technically it's not, since we're well within the FAR guidelines. So it's a little bit difficult to just sort of have that debate with myself about, well, is this overbuilding a lot or not? Because technically it's not, but it does appear to be rather imposing. But that also, I could probably get over it. The fence height, that for me was a big problem, because the city code of this commission, as a general rule, we we've tried to deflect people's temptations, anybody's temptation to actually build a compound as opposed to a home. We think that that's detrimental to the to the streetscape, but it would appear that the applicant is more than willing to accommodate that concern. So then, last but certainly not least, we do have the impact on the neighbor, and this is something I just don't think that I would have the right as a commissioner, as a planning commissioner, to overlook. And it's very clearly laid out in the staff report that this design is in conflict with the rule that the neighbors' light and views cannot be materially impeded. And this sort of this concern seems to pass the test of materiality. So I guess I would like to see if some modification of the design in order to mitigate this situation, because as it stands now, I don't think that I can make the findings on that basis, despite some of the other favorable characteristics of the program. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Commissioner Swisher.
Well, it's very nice to go last. Well, not quite last, but to follow commissioners who are much more expert in home building than I am. But I echo a couple of the same concerns that were brought up. Number one, I think I really appreciate the architect and their attempts at making the neighbors happy with offering to do work on their houses to improve the situation. I think that goes a long way into being neighborly and sensitive to the needs of your neighbors. I think that I agree with Mr. Wagstaff that it is an imposing thing to be looking out on, especially because of the fact that it's blocky and it's dark, and it does block the view to some extent, not tremendously. And I don't think that everybody has an absolute right to not have some neighbor build a little bit to obstruct some of their views. But we are facing a situation in which we do have a rule, as Mr. Kunstler says, to try to avoid that when possible. So I would like to see two things. One, to see if there is any kind of modification that could be made to mitigate that. And the other is to potentially soften that side of the house, either with greenery on the side or something that makes it so that it's not like sort of a wall. I mean, I like the aesthetic a lot. I'm not personally a huge fan of modern architecture, but I really appreciate it. And I think that this is a beautiful design that goes well in that neighborhood in particular. But I think that the concern of the neighbor at 73 is legitimate in that looking out across something of that kind of bulk and design without some kind of ability to soften some of the lines, I think that needs to be done a little bit. But I think that the architect's gone a long way in trying to help people out. And I think that maybe just a little more work is necessary to make people happy in this situation. As far as the fence goes, I agree with everybody else. There's no reason why that fence needs to be 6 feet where it is. And if it be pushed back or if it was lowered, that would be fine. From a fire standpoint, the side vegetation needs to be cut down as well. Having just done that on my property, I really appreciate that it makes a big difference in terms of fire risk. And that's about it.
Okay. Thank you. And I get to go last. So I think I pretty much agree with the comments of everybody that came before me. I guess the only thing I would like to add is that I do believe that the applicant has tried anyway to accommodate the neighbors and to be aware of their concerns and to do the best they could to accommodate. This is a bit of a challenging lot. It's pie shaped and half of it's under 40% or whatever the number was. A lot of it's underwater. And there's really not a lot of space if you're trying to add extra room for a family. So I'm not sure what the right answer is. I'm sympathetic to the neighbor, to actually all the things that the neighbor said, all the way around, on the sides and across the lagoon and everything else. I think the design is actually quite nice. I like modern architecture, but I do have to sort of comment on the neighbor at 90 who does have. I'm actually more concerned, honestly, about the light blockage than I am about the view, because I think, you know, there is still some view there, but I'm sympathetic to what she's saying. I honestly just don't know what the applicant could do to have the space that they're looking for, and I guess it's not ours to solve. But and on the fence height exception, I think I agree with everybody else. And I heard the applicant say that they were willing to, you know, move the fence and reduce the obligation to get a fence height exception. So it's really about the design review and about, you know, the building itself. So I think, I honestly don't think that right now, from everything I'm hearing, that we can make findings for approval at this point. But I'm not sure exactly what the direction is to the applicant, other than that they need to see if they can somehow address the neighbor at 90's concerns about their views and light. I mean, at this point, I guess we need to make a motion to continue, I think.
If I can just add something, I would be nice to give and I agree that the architect is, because I've been there a lot of times, he's tried hard to work with the neighbors, and I don't want to give any design thoughts, but I think there's a way that you can at least break up the mass of that one element in some way, and slide some of the spaces around a little bit. But and I understand the modular aspect of it, and that might make it more difficult. It's not an easy puzzle, but I would like to see if there's a way, if there's a way to accommodate the neighbor at least a little bit. And so that would be the direction I would give them. And that's not really sort of touchy-feely direction, but I think that's about the best we can offer.
So I guess the question is, what is the preference of the applicant? Would it be for, because we've got, you know, there are a couple of paths that we can take. We can do a continuance as Laura suggested, or we can do a denial without prejudice, which would allow the applicant to appeal to the city council if they saw fit. And perhaps that would accommodate their schedule better. I have no idea. I think it really is a question for them.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want me to allow the architect to speak, or?
Yeah, sure. They can say what their preference is.
Sure.
So yeah, we appreciate all that feedback. We certainly don't want to reject or appeal your decision. I think we're creative, and we'll find a way to kind of massage it. I just wanted to mention that we've been working on this project for 1.5 years, 2 years with the client, and they've spent a lot of money, and we've gone through many iterations to try and fit as carefully as we can on the site, the very constrained site. Some things are a little easier than others, like the building height. We could look at reducing as much as we can, and reducing the ceiling heights. As Commissioner Wagstaff noted, the modular nature of this, we're kind of limited by those floor thicknesses and the ceiling heights and what have you. So we'll do the best we can there. And in terms of that corner, though, the southeast corner, we've talked about using a green wall, a vegetated wall there. Those are things we'd love to employ. We just don't put them on the architectural drawings so that you can clearly see the architecture. So this is not to say that would just be a blank wall. That would certainly be softened by vegetation. So yeah, I guess. I just wanted to say we wouldn't appeal your decision. We'd hope to work with you and come back at the next hearing if we can with some modifications.
So it sounds like you're probably most inclined to get a continuation.
That's what it sounds like to me.
So I would ask my fellow commissioners to make a motion to continue.
Sure.
I guess to a date uncertain at this point, right?
Can
Yeah,
I interrupt
yeah.
with a question?
Mhm.
I am a little perplexed from his response, how if we're going to be making amendments that would meet the concerns expressed by the commissioners with regard to the light or air and blocking of views for Mrs. Weeder. So it might be helpful if you could be slightly more specific as to what you're looking for. And also I'd caution you to consider a green wall as a solution, only because it would be almost impossible for planning staff to make sure that wall is growing in perpetuity. Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
So Chris, are you suggesting that maybe in the motion we specify that the concerns about light and air be addressed when the applicant resubmits?
Right. I mean, it sounds like you need some modification to this corner of the building in order to address that. And if that's the case, I think that making that clear is a good idea.
Okay, let's do that. Okay. Laura, you want me to try it?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I would move to continue item design review fence height exception 20-24 for 80 Corte del Valle to date uncertain with guidance provided to the applicant to modify the design in order to address concerns about air and light affecting the neighbor at 90 Corte del Valle.
Is there a second?
I would second that.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. I think that was 4 in favor, and Commissioner Chalmers is recused herself. Okay, so we will move on to the business items. The first thing is a review of the work program for 2021 and upcoming projects. I think, Neil, that's you.
Hello. Thank you, commissioners and members of the Chairwoman Tubber, and members of the Planning Commission. Sorry, it's been a long break.
Sorry, I'm just gonna jump in. Natasha, I promoted you back up to a panelist, so if you can unhide your video. Sorry.
Congratulations.
Neil, you can share your screen if you want to.
And I am actually in a screen sharing mode. Can everyone see me?
Yep.
No,
I can see you.
See you.
but we
I
can
think
see
it
you. We
depends
can't
on
see
how
your
you're
screen.
doing.
You're not sharing your screen.
We can't see.
Oh, sorry. I can share my screen. Yeah. No, that's good. Thank you. So I wanted to just start for the first meeting of the year to kind of set the table because as we've been working on completing the draft general plan and preparing that to eventually go to hearing, there's a lot of other projects, policy related projects that are in the works that have been initiated through a variety of sort of funding and collaborative efforts. So I want to go through these sort of in a general sense tonight, and not go too much into the weeds, recognizing that over the year, I'm going to be setting up some very specific workshops on some of these topics, or meetings or hearings on some of these topics. And in some cases, we may be forming committees that typically require participation of one or two of the planning commissioners, particularly for the housing element update that we'll start working on later this year. And so I kind of wanted to walk through this with that perspective. So let me start out by talking about the general plan update. Let me get you to the screen here. Oh. That's correct. Location. Okay. So share. Here we go. Okay, so everyone can see our web page here with the general plan on it.
Yep.
The general plan update. Okay, so the steering committee completed work on the draft general plan in October, and then we went to work taking what was kind of a working draft and formatting it into a really finalizing the formatting and making it fully accessible document, just really dotting the I's, crossing the T's. And so that is now on the website. We've also included, and that's about a 271-page document. And for the commissioners, and I guess I might have a show of hands here. Who on the commission is maybe not very familiar with what a general plan really is and how it functions? I don't want to spend a lot of time with the public at this point going through it, but I would like to get some feedback from the commission, and I think you might be able to, if you read this, if you start reading the plan, it's somewhat self-explanatory, and I think you'll begin to get a good idea of the concept behind the general plan and how it functions. But I'm just kind of curious what the commissioners have you reviewed, looked at our current general plan? I know Daniel Kunstler, you've been on our general plan steering committee. Brock has worked with many communities on design review and in some cases projects that may involve general plan review. But I think one question here is maybe to look at it and determine the degree to which you may want to hold a informational workshop that is valuable both to yourselves as well as the public. Certainly there's a lot of members of the public who were either on the Citizens Advisory Committee or may be familiar with planning and the general plan process and the required elements and how a general plan really applies to the city procedures, particularly the zoning ordinance. But I think it'll be helpful just to get, not tonight, but maybe get some feedback from each of you on what you may want to learn more of, or if you need some resources, and if you want to sit and kind of talk or get any sort of primers about the general plan. I think another question is, this is online. Do commissioners need, would you like to get a a printed copy of the general plan to be able to work with. If you can't easily, like I said, it's 270 pages. There's not a lot of color, or there are some diagrams through it and there are some graphics, but it's a pretty straightforward document. So that's another question I'd like to get some feedback from all the commissioners when you have a chance, is whether or not you'd like to get a paper copy, because in a few months we'll be beginning a public hearing process. And that process will be initiated with the Planning Commission. So that's some things to think about if you haven't already started getting familiar with the document. I recommend you do so. And also, just recently, we have initiated the CEQA review process, and that starts with a notice of preparation that goes out to the public, but it also goes out to many agencies, both local and state agencies, so they can review the document and provide comment on it, particularly in anticipation of the EIR. Now, the notice of preparation is just a narrow window of this month for comments on any issues to be addressed. Then we begin the preparation process. That goes for several months. We will have produced a draft EIR, and then we issue a notice of availability, and there's a 45-day period. And in that time, we begin public hearings. We anticipate that for mid to late spring to begin that. So essentially, the EIR is a parallel but integrated process with the general plan update. And just as a note, after initial public review at the Planning Commission and then at the City Council, and typically we plan for at least 2 public hearings each, we then gather any comments from the EIR, any EIR comments, and then we come back with a response to those comments and a final EIR, as well as any direction on amendments or changes to the general plan that are directed either as a result of the hearing process through the Commission and Council, or to potentially mitigate policies or programs to potentially mitigate specific impacts that the Commissioner Council would like to see mitigated, as opposed to just recognized in the EIR. So with that, we'll be planning to have some informational workshops, but I want to again kind of get feedback from each of you on some of the structure for that individually. So do you have any questions for me at this point?
I would like, very much like to have a printed copy, if that's not too much of a hassle, but.
No. We anticipate that. We just didn't want to go about printing a whole lot of copies just to, typically in the past, these types of procedures, big plan updates, specific plans, EIRs, you end up you'd print like 50 documents. It's a huge process, and then they're handed out or sold or so on, for $5. In today's day and age, with digital technology being what it is, everything's a lot more accessible online, but we can certainly provide you a printed copy. And if anyone else wants that, you can take a look at it and decide, and then just send me, let me know. If you can let me know within a few days, that would be good, because what I'll try to do is print these up as needed in batches.
I can send you an email as well, but I do not want a printed copy. I'd rather save the paper, but it might be helpful to have, and I'm trying to find it now, but I saw there was a a plan showing all the different zonings of the neighborhoods within Larkspur. And
It would
that would be
include-
a color one.
Yeah, it would include that. If some of you would rather just get like printed copies of part of the document,
Yeah.
like just the land use map or the various, the land use circulation diagrams or the health and safety diagrams, we could just print those separately as well.
Great, thank you.
So I won't go through this in more detail right now. I'll just give you, again, it is, if you get to our, planning, you can always type in general plan update. It's searchable and through various avenues on our website.
Let me, Neil, before you print it up, let me scan through it online just to see how much different it is from what I've already got.
Okay. And in terms of what you've already got, are you talking about the current general plan?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is, it's really revised. I mean, it contains, it's an update to a great degree, but it's been reorganized and there's been a lot of updates to it to really meet more current regulations and current standards. So it's a very different document.
Okay.
And also different, different circumstances.
I would, with that, I would say we've, kept a lot of the current land use designations and the density standards, but certainly there's a lot of very specific programs and policies that have been modified. Okay, any other questions on the general plan update? And just again, to keep in mind, I will probably be having a discussion item with you or workshops or scheduling workshops on upcoming agendas, for really throughout the year. There's going to be a number of items. So another project coming up is the Objective Design and Development Standards. The acronym is ODDS. And we talked about this several months ago. And it is a process, it's been a collaborative process through Marin County, managed by Marin County, but collaborating with most of the other cities in Marin, including Larkspur. And it's a process using funding provided by the state to help further the development of housing, particularly affordable housing, and funded through what's called the State Planning Grant Program last year, SB2 monies. And so by taking this funding and compiling it together in a collaborative effort, Marin County is coming up with a series of objective design and development standards. And the first phase at this point is really developing kind of a toolkit, sort of a basic toolkit based on, what are considered sort of the premier types of small multiple family, 3-4 unit design, to larger multiple family development throughout Marin, and begin developing what would be objective design review standards. So the state, in much of the housing legislation that has come through in the last several years, there is a lot of push towards removing housing projects from the discretionary design review process, which is seen as a significant obstacle to creating particularly affordable housing projects, to a more streamlined and standardized process. And the state is not trying to dictate exactly what those standards are, but they are trying to steer communities to adopt a more standardized approach to multifamily and affordable housing design. So this is, and in fact, the state, in some cases, if for communities that have not been adequately meeting their housing goals, if they've been really short on meeting their housing goals, which we have not been that short on meeting our housing goals, but there's potential for penalty to then require objective design and development standards for certain types of projects within certain locations and scenarios. So there's a lot of complicated layered formulas the state has imposed, which is to some degree imposing the requirement for objective standards on communities. But even more so as we get into the housing element process, it will be incumbent on many agencies, and it may be incumbent on the city of Larkspur to be able to have objective standards in place to be able to identify opportunity sites as likely locations for development that meet the test of the standards for HCD, or the Department of Housing and Community Development. So there's kind of a longer explanation of the purpose of this process and the benefits of objective and design development standards. And I would say, obviously, at first glance, it is a concern, I think, for communities like Larkspur that have valued its design review process. It is a concern that this essentially takes away or removes the standard sort of open-ended discretionary review within the context of everything around it. And depending on what the developer proposes, it removes it and really tries to create more of a formula approach where you're kind of, now the benefit side of this is the city, if you adopt these standards, developers will have to comply with them. So it is, in another sense, providing a roadmap for what the community may want to see should we have housing development in certain locations. So this is beginning to create the format or the framework of design, sort of a design templates that developers can use. And if they don't use them, then they go to the design review process and they take their chances there if they can't meet these standards. Now, I will say the more we delve into this, it gets very complex in terms of the push and pull of what you can really, how you can apply an objective design standard and still meet certain housing or density criterias. There's still a lot of discussion on that, but I think basically beginning to look at what is the architectural sort of forms and materials, what are the options to kind of lay out prescribed solutions. It's a challenge, but it may really bear some worthwhile fruit for down the road. We're not anticipating this is something we're going to develop in the next few months to apply to all development, but we need to begin preparing for the eventuality, particularly in light of the housing element update that's going to be due, and I'll talk about in a few minutes. So if you go to our website, and I'm going to be updating this because we nearly have a draft toolkit. It's sort of the very basics, And from that, we can begin working with yourselves and the community to refine and better address these standards to fit within Larkspur. One thing I would note, there has been some analysis of very specific sites and details on those sites, and some templates developed for architectural detailing, which actually utilize sites in Larkspur, including Edgewater, the Rose Lane Terraces, and the Blue Rock Inn as a sort of classic structure within a historic downtown environment. So far, we're already taking the template, and the toolkit is already borrowing from parts of Larkspur in the direction it's going. As part of this, we'll be exploring with the consultants who are going to be assisting in how we apply them to the code, creating a code section, which would then identify where these may substitute or may be applicable in absence of the design review process. And again, it's really a default at this point, not something we're intending to develop for the purpose of implementing right away, but rather as having as a default should we be subject to some various legislation. And two, it'll also include some, like an architectural palette. It can include a lot of details. So I'm working with the consultants who've been working with all the agencies throughout Marin, and we'll be setting up some workshops in the very near future to begin this process. And I think one question is whether any of the commissioners want to take a more specific or take more of a role as a subcommittee of some sort in working on this tool, because it's going to be challenging to, I think, resolve or do much within a really broad workshop, and it may help to have a focused kind of working group. That's a suggestion, and as I get more information, I will I'll provide some more detail and ask for some feedback from members of the commission as well.
Neil, what's kind of interesting is we have been here before. Larkspur had a design review process. It was decided it didn't need that as long as we had standards. And so you had 40% coverage or whatever, depending on slope. And then a couple houses came along that figured out how to maximize all that, much to the dismay of the neighbors, and we went back to design review. So,
well, and I think Brock, one thing to note there is when I first came to Larkspur, most single-family homes were exempt from design review. So as long as you complied with regulations and so on, but design review still applied to most commercial and multifamily development. So it's been in place. I think the city of Larkspur for many years had a design review committee, and then eventually did what a lot of communities do and consolidated that into the planning process. So there wouldn't be two parallel processes where an applicant is kind of bouncing back and forth between a planning commission reviewing uses and variances and other sorts of entitlements and bouncing it to the design review board for approval of architectural details and so on. So it's generally been a discretionary process, except as you said, most single family homes were exempt. And then I think there was a point where Larkspur began to feel that we needed more oversight in the neighborhoods because the zoning standards just left a little too much up to the discretion of the architects.
Yeah, well,
But what the state is doing is really reversing that, really working to reverse that trend in a large way and get the cities to say up front, what's acceptable and really reduce the obstacles to housing. And the design review process is considered a significant obstacle. I think that's anyone from a housing perspective can recognize that, but there's also concern for maintaining community character. And the idea of this approach is to try to do both.
yeah.
Neil, there is someone from the public who's had his hand up for quite a while, Kevin.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that. Do you want to have someone speak?
Well, he's had his hand up for a long time. I'm not sure what it's on, but I would like to give him the opportunity to.
Sure.
It might have been about the general plan update.
Okay. Kevin, you can unmute yourself and speak now.
Thank you. My question does go back to the general.
I'm sorry, who is this?
Kevin Carroll from Marin Mobile Home Park.
Hi, Kevin.
And my question is about the general plan update. You mentioned about, you were asking if the members wanted a printed copy, and I was wondering if it was going to be available to the public too, a printed copy.
You know what? I think we can do that, and let me find out. And I have your email, and I'll make you. I'll get back with you on that, Kevin.
Great, I appreciate it. Thank you.
There likely will be some cost to that, because we do provide it online. People can print it themselves or download it, and printing is expensive. So I'll have to check on the cost of that.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay.
So Neil, just back to the odds discussion.
Yes.
And the sort of the discretionary process that we've followed within the Planning Commission as we review applications. It sort of occurs to me, and I think we saw an example of that this evening as well, is that
I'm sorry, Daniel, you're pretty quiet.
Oh, sorry, I've got to just get used to getting closer to this mic. Yeah, so regarding Oz and the process that we're already following when we look at when we perform our design reviews, and I think we had an example of that this evening, where my fellow commissioners and myself, what we tend to do is with the guidance, with your guidance, with the other staff's guidance, is really try to apply what's already in the code. So when you get issues such as, well, streetscape, we want to preserve the character of the streetscape throughout the Larkspur. Well, okay, there's some objective guidelines that we already have with regard, for example, to placement and height of fences, and that's the example that we saw tonight. So it just occurs to me that there are already things that are being applied within our own processes, even if they're formally discretionary, that could go into the development of some of these standards.
Well, the idea of these standards are to recognize that the zoning will kind of take you so far, but ultimately the box that gets built and some of the details, some of the fenestration, some of the elements such as the covered parking, or how parking is oriented, how the porches, access to the street might be oriented. A lot of these various elements are addressed or would be addressed in various ways through the objective standards. So it's a combination of sort of site design, check the box that, whether it's tree preservation or it's how it's presented to the street, what its setback is, a building, maybe how it steps as it increases in height, and then how materials are applied, or are materials applied, any variety, and I've always anticipated that the standards may be comprised of several different sort of architectural approaches. I think what's really challenging is you can only provide so much of a box. You're going to only provide, you can't completely just mix and match everything, because that could be a jumble. It's got to be cohesive. Certain types of design, certain design elements fit with certain types of architecture, and other design elements, colors, materials don't, and they fit with other types of architecture. So
I find myself wondering if that the more boxes we design to check, whether that actually invites more requests for variances than the other way around. So, I guess we'll have to be careful to make sure that the objective, which is to streamline the process, doesn't turn into the contrary.
Yeah. Well, I think ultimately that a design that works may not be necessarily and again, I don't want to get too much into the detailed weeds here, but a design that works may not be a real statement building. It's going to be something that the community can be comfortable with. And ideally it's going to be better than just a really cheap box, but it's going to be something that's comfortable, but probably not a statement. And then, it may have some historic details and leanings, but it may not, try to be, pretend to be a real historic structure. And at the same hand, if a developer comes in and says, we want to do something that's really a statement, then the discussion will be, okay, fine. Then you can go through the design review process and convince us that this design will be, we're not saying it's better or worse than our objective standards, but it can meet our design review standards. If you're willing to go through that process. And you might convince the community that you're better off with a nice or a real elegant statement type of project, or a contemporary statement. But that'll be the option for the applicant, given the legislation. Does that make sense? So I would recommend, if you haven't seen it, is just kind of read through this, watch the video, and I'd be happy to, I guess, kind of talk, or we could arrange some conference one-on-one to kind of walk you through it. But what I will be doing soon is, again, getting the consultants will be coming before you with a more formalized presentation and sort of work program to begin refining the toolkit. Okay, so then other things on my agenda here tonight. One of the things we have to do every year is we prepare the annual progress report for the housing element and for the general plan. It goes to principally the purpose is really to report housing activity to the Department of Housing and Community Development. There's also a report of general plan program work that goes as well to them, and to Office of Planning and Research, OPR. So every year by April 1st, we have to report. And the reporting mechanism has become, I will just kind of characterize it as saying, more and more involved over the last several years. It is now comprised of a large spreadsheet, several different spreadsheets where agencies need to identify, a variety of factors in housing development, what's in review, what's been applied for, what's been approved through design review and entitled, what's been issued a building permit and under construction, and what's been finalized, and all these various stages and various levels of affordability, and then various other categories of whether it's ownership or rental and so on. Unfortunately, this hasn't, I think for a lot of agencies, these can be pretty challenging projects, just to, as long as you've got good software and you're monitoring and tracking all your development in your units, it's probably pretty easy. For us, we're working on getting the software that could help us do that. But in the meantime, we're kind of tracking it through, just checking back through permits and doing spreadsheets. The one thing that makes it easy, unfortunately, is we just have not had much development over the last several years. But in particular, this year, I'm not sure we've had one new housing unit, and we've only had a couple ADUs. And one of the reasons I brought this to the commission's attention is because we have adopted over the last couple of years, new ADU regulations that are, really liberalize the ability to put in ADUs and JADUs and to meet state regulations, very consistent with other regulations throughout Marin County. And the only exception, one of the few exceptions, is we are restricting ADUs in the Madrone Canyon area and up on Marina Vista because of the lack of really good evacuation, ingress and egress, and emergency ingress and egress on those roads, given the load and the narrowness of the roadways up in those particular areas. And that was with the direction of the fire department, but that's only about a little less than 10% of our single family residential area. And despite that, we're really not seeing much development of ADUs yet. We're getting a lot of inquiries. We've been getting a lot of inquiries, and seemingly it just a lot of, it seems that maybe one of the issues is a lot of the projects or the applicants or property owners are interested in putting in an ADU as long as it really doesn't cost anything. And permits needed in order to make a space habitable or even convert a garage to an ADU is not nothing. You need to make an adequate floor and egress, and you have to get in a kitchen and plumb it properly and things like that. So I don't know if those are the issues, but I'm interested in finding out, kind of exploring why we're still having challenges. I put up on the page here you're looking at on our website, we do have a page to better explain what we're doing with accessory dwelling units. And we have created several months ago, and we've been handing out an application form, and I'll bring this up, to accompany building permits. And if the commission remembers, what we've done under the new regulation is make ADUs a building permit process. It's not a planning review. It's something you come in with a building permit, but you accompany it with an application to identify the type of accessory dwelling unit you're building. And with each type of dwelling unit, you kind of provide some basic information. And then with each dwelling unit, there's a checklist. And so then each checklist kind of goes through some of the standards for each of those types of units and whether or not you comply with those standards. So it's really a roadmap to help people determine what it is they need in order to build an ADU and to meet our regulations. You know, and what size, if it's a 1-bedroom, if it's a 2-bedroom, you know, what is your maximum square footage? So we've done that. We have a checklist for each type, and we've been giving those out, and we're kind of hopeful that helps spur, and certainly part of it is to make our process as expedient as possible. We've connected, we've provided links to the code sections. We've identified where we do restrict ADUs, and we've had several conversations with a few different property owners in that area, in those areas, who some fairly understanding and supportive, and others who would really like to have an ADU there, despite the fire department's concerns. And then we've described the checklist a bit more here. Also, another resource, if you have anybody asking you about ADUs or they're interested in building one, we've worked, again, another collaborative effort with the county using state funding grant, a ADU Marin resource page. So this is a page really helped to provide guidance for property owners, not just on local regulations, but sort of on the various costs, choosing an architect, how you want to approach it, what you're trying to achieve, or do you really want to rent this to somebody? Do you want to build housing for your family? You know, income, what sizes, just sort of a whole variety of tools. So kind of preliminary concepts, more information, and then it links to our website and our information, as well as other cities throughout Marin, and then examples of lease agreements. There's also a, and I have not tried this yet because this is fairly new workbook, but there's also a calculator in here, oh, there we go. No, I won't go through all this. I haven't tried it yet myself, but I think I understand this is a calculator that's really kind of, you work through the type of construction you're proposing, where you're proposing to do it, and you begin to, you know, get an idea of what the affordability and the return is. So it's a resource that's out there.
Neil, I have a question on that. So
yeah,
I'm just looking through that website on the ADU, and it says select your city, so but it doesn't include San Rafael or Novato. Oh no, wait, there's Novato. It doesn't have San Rafael. Are they do they have a different set of rules, or?
Well, actually, it's interesting because this was done through a collaborative use of the state funding, an agreement between the county and all the cities. And unfortunately, San Rafael, which is fine, they already have their own very aggressive ADU program, and they've got a pretty dynamic work site. So they elected not to be part of that collaboration to develop this interactive website. So unfortunately, I think some people think, oh, well, San Rafael is just not interested in ADUs and hasn't been pursuing this, when in fact, it's really quite the opposite. They've been very, very aggressive in outreach and encouraging and reducing their obstacles. And they've been actually getting a good amount of ADUs within the city. So San Rafael really is doing a great job. They're doing fine. They just didn't happen to be part of this project. So don't misconstrue that. I know some people have complained about it or asked that same question, but I can assure you San Rafael is, you know, they're a big city and they function fairly independently for a lot of their advanced planning work. Where with this housing and some of these other projects, the smaller cities are trying to work in a more collaborative shared service approach. Does that make sense?
Yes, no, thank you. Thank you.
So, yeah, so my thought with this is, I think it would be helpful to, I'd love to have the commissioners take a look through some of these materials as well and give us some feedback, and maybe we'll have a workshop in the near future to look at what it is in our rules, what it is in our presentation, what it is in our outreach maybe that's lacking, or, you know, we may want to start getting a feel of why we're not really getting, you know, as much response as this as a number of the other communities are. And it may be simply the nature of our particular properties. Larkspur has, while we are, you know, while we're similar to a lot of communities in Marin, we have, we're fairly built out. We have a lot of smaller lots. And we do have lots with slope limits, already homes that are already over FAR and so on. But again, many of these rules exempt ADUs under certain circumstances from some of those restrictions. So it's still, we're still trying to, you know, it's kind of striking me as why we're not getting much response here. And part of the concern is, as we go into our housing element, if we rely, in order to rely on ADUs as a potential source of housing, as a projection to the future, we have to be able to look at how our production is being ramped up through our regulations. And if it's really just not there, no matter what we do, then we're not going to be able to rely on ADUs for much of our housing element, our RENA requirement over the next 8 years. So let me get to, sorry, I'm bouncing around to a couple things here. So one thing I want to go to here really quickly is, I'll just go to our current housing element website. So our current housing element is for the years 2015 through 2013. It was adopted in 2014. And the next housing element needs to be adopted by January 31st of 2023. It's going to be a 2023 through 31 housing element timeline. And if, as I've mentioned to the Planning Commission, and we've had discussions with the City Council on this in recent meetings relative to the ABAG Housing Committee workshop, which is allocates and helps create the regional housing need allocation for the various agencies. When they put all the various factors together and determined the regional housing needs, a lot of housing, which in the last cycle had been really focused more closer to jobs and within the urban centers, they've modulated that approach where there's a little more push out to the suburban areas, particularly recognizing that these areas are, quote, high resource areas that have somewhat better infrastructure, financing for schools and services. And in some cases like ours, we've got some relatively close access to transportation. So for Marin County and particularly for Larkspur, and in response to the housing crisis that the city has been facing, they're really front loading a lot of the planned housing over the Plan Bay area to this housing element window. And anyway, I think long story short, as a result, we're looking at potentially over 1,000 units, 1,020 units in our next RENA count. And that is about 3 times our larger count, which was our prior cycle. Our last cycle, we had a little over 132 units altogether. So it's nearly 10 times our current cycle, and certainly a lot larger than the biggest cycle that the city's ever faced before. The other challenge with the RENA or the housing element is, and as I've kind of discussed on a few occasions, in the past, the housing element was, and the update compliance was really an exercise to provide the zoning to potentially accommodate the development. And over the years, HCD has gotten a little bit stricter and stricter about how they see whether or not you're really meeting that test and you're going to be able to actually develop the units that are identified in the housing element as your goal. Because for many of these cycles, in particularly communities in Marin and suburban areas, have generally come up short. Built out areas don't easily accommodate more housing, even though their general plan might allow for redevelopment of shopping centers or redevelopment of older office parks or industrial uses. There aren't always the economic drivers to do that, or really the entitlement process, a streamlined entitlement process or something to really accommodate developers to do that. So often agencies would be coming up short of their housing goals. So the twofold effect of that is the legislation now tracks your progress and begins to impose somewhat red flag penalties if you're not meeting your goals. And 2, for the next housing element, identifying sites is going to be more than simply saying, well, we have the zoning, we've got the unit density can accommodate 300 units here. You're really going to have those opportunity sites. You're really going to have to be able to show how you've created the avenues to facilitate the development. While the city doesn't actually develop projects, and this is going to be a very interesting exercise, but while the city doesn't actually develop projects, the housing element has to sort of pass the red face test that that these units will in fact be built. Another major challenge to this RENA that has been that is in the process, and it's near the 11th hour point at this time. It's fairly done, but it's not quite complete. The RENA is our number of 1,000 units, and nearly 2/3 of that is affordable units. Almost 300 of those are supposed to be very low income units. That presents a significant challenge right there, because if you're developing these units through inclusionary housing processes, just as part of other market development, that typically might only yield 10, 15, 20% units. So you need to have some pretty substantial market development in order to yield those kinds of numbers, certainly more than our housing element even requires. Other tools to get those types of affordability numbers are, of course, through nonprofit development or other sort of subsidized or funded projects. And And the state is working to facilitate and encourage those through other avenues, and we'll see if those come to pass. But that is another really challenging aspect of our next housing element update. So just something to kind of keep in mind when we are doing the general plan EIR. As we're preparing this, we're looking at including the types of numbers and studying the types of numbers that are being identified in our arena. So we begin to prepare an programmatic environmental document that may support our housing element as that comes towards us. Our general plan will not include necessarily all the policies and details that would be required of the housing element, but we'll look at the sites and under our current densities, and I think we certainly have sites that could potentially yield a lot of units, but we don't really have the policies in place in terms of height or other development standards that might necessarily be accommodating to that. But as we do the environmental review, we can begin kind of preparing the analysis for what we may have to undertake with the housing element. So we're looking at the funding sources that are coming in for our EIR and the structure of that process relative to our current general plan update. So just a little side note there on things we're working on. So with that, the last item is there is one other SB2 funded project that we're working on in collaboration with the county. It's a little bit of a smaller project, but it's an analysis of our inclusionary housing, and it's an inclusionary zoning study and housing mitigation and commercial linkage fees. So on the website, I brought up the zoning code page. Currently right now, the city of Larkspur does have an affordable housing fund and inclusionary in lieu fee requirements. So we have in lieu zoning, which is essentially we require a certain amount of affordable units for projects of 5 units or greater. And one thing we'll be testing in this study is whether that our affordability levels and our affordability requirements in our inclusionary zoning either encourage affordable housing or hinder it, because actually there is a degree to which inclusionary requirements can hinder housing development because it just adds on cost. San Rafael recently reduced its inclusionary housing requirement. It's an interesting dynamic because certainly the most practical way to get affordable housing is to get it built through the inclusionary process. So we'll be looking at that closely, and we'll also be looking at housing mitigation fees for projects for new single family housing, new commercial market housing development, whether that's done with inclusionary development or through mitigation fees to support additional housing as a result of that housing, affordable housing, that is, as a result of the market housing development. And additionally, commercial linkage fees. As commercial uses are developed, there is a link of housing need that applies to commercial, industrial type development and offices. Now, again, Larkspur is a fairly built out community. I think it's unlikely we're going to have the kind of commercial development that's really going to yield a significant amount of housing fees, but that's included in part of the study. So this is really a study just to really bring our inclusionary zoning and the balance, the requirement into up to speed with current conditions. And also look at how we may, if we can use this to really further, particularly very low income housing, because that's our highest, really our highest and most challenging housing requirement under ARENA. So I anticipate we'll be coming before the commission with the findings and recommendations of this study in a few months, and potentially with a draft ordinance to adjust our inclusionary housing and mitigation fee ordinance. So with that, that's just a number of the current planning projects. And again, as I mentioned, in-house right now, we are functioning with a constrained budget, and a lot of this is a good portion of the housing work is being funded through state grant funding, which is actually quite a challenge to manage, and it's going towards, as money comes to us, we give to the county, and the county is hiring consultants. So it's really quite a number of steps to manage these funds for these projects, but we do have to, kind of work with the Department of Housing Community Development and ABAG and our regional partners to do our part to, encourage housing in Larkspur. The other things we're doing, as I mentioned, again, we are in constrained budget. We, with COVID, it certainly has affected the budget. We're working with part of our staff in furlough. And another project that we're undertaking is we're now working on negotiations with a vendor to provide new permit software to help us, better manage projects, both manage permits electronically as well as potentially plan review and so on. This could be very valuable given both our current conditions and the likelihood that we'll see a lot more remote work as a practice in the future. But that's going to be a year-long process and certainly requires a good bit of involvement of staff, just on kind of focusing on our processes now. How do we tailor that to new software and onboarding that? So just a couple of things to keep in mind. And with that, I'll just open it up to any further questions. If anyone in the audience has a question, I'd be happy to try to respond. And again, I'll be coming back to the commission with more detail on each of these projects, but I thought it'd be good to begin looking at these documents, getting familiar with these various topics. So it's 9:30. Any other questions or thoughts? And again, I would be happy to talk with any one of you individually if you have particular questions you want to get into the weeds.
Thank you, Neil. With no questions, we'll move on to approval of the minutes of November 22nd.
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
Is there a second? Daniel, did you just second mutely?
No, I didn't. There's one typo on page 6. It states that Chair Talbert closed the public meeting, but Chair Talbert was not present at that meeting, so would have had a hard time closing it. So it's on page 6. So, Neil, if you just make a notation of that, just to correct the typo and protect Laura.
Thank you.
But I will second the motion otherwise to approve it.
Making a motion to approve the amended minutes saying that Chair Tabor wasn't there.
Okay, I'll second.
Well, Sorry, who was the chair?
I was acting chair,
Yeah.
Okay, we'll say Chair Kunstler,
acting chair.
Back, sure, yeah.
acting chair.
Don't give me any honors I don't deserve.
So all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
So I think that was 3 in favor and I wasn't there, so I am abstaining. And I think Brock, same thing for you.
You're
You're
muted.
on.
I was not there either.
Right, okay, so 2 abstentions. Does any planning commissioner have anything they would like to report? Okay, seeing none or hearing none. The only other business item is election of the officers for 2021. So that's chair and vice chair.
You know, I really will have to nominate Commissioner Wagstaff to be chair.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All
I
unanimous?
think there were 3 in favor, 4 in favor. And I guess Brock abstained.
Yeah,
You can vote for it, Brock.
oh, okay, yes.
Okay,
All right, so then we had a unanimous approval for Brock to be chair starting next meeting. What about vice chair?
I was gonna suggest Daniel be vice chair.
Second it.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And no storming Larkspur City Hall.
Any opposed? I see. I think that was unanimous for Daniel as
Yeah.
well.
I have a question actually. Laura, is your term up? Is that why you're stepping back?
No, we only serve for a year.
It's just 1-year term? Okay.
Yeah, you did a fantastic job. Thank you.
Zooming it.
yeah, well, you know, you had to negotiate some pretty interesting circumstances.
That's why she got paid the big bucks.
Right.
Exactly, psychic pay. So I think the last thing is to move to adjourn the meeting.
Yeah, I'll move to adjourn.
Second it.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Okay, that was a unanimous adjournment.